here's something that I've been thinking about lately. Well, it's actually something that I have been living with for years now, but I've only recently found words for. I'm here in Prague, right, where I've lived with for a while now, and it's a city that itself is a paradox. There are medieval buildings, next to functionalist architecture, and it is a beautiful city, and it's a very safe city, but it is built on centuries of upheaval. And I'm thinking about how we're all taught from a pretty much a young age that contradictions are problems to be solved. That if two things seem opposed, one of them must be wrong. But what if that's not actually true, right? What if the ability to hold paradoxes, to let two seemingly opposite truths, exist at the same time? And that is actually one of the most essential skills for living an intentional, grounded life. Because here's what I've noticed. The people who fall apart, they aren't really usually the ones that are facing contradictions. They are the ones who can't hold them. They're the ones who need everything to make sense in that neat and linear way. And when reality itself is, it is fundamentally paradoxical, right? So that becomes exhausting. So today we're going to talk about just that, the art of holding paradoxes, not resolving them, not to choose one side or the other, but developing that capacity to stand in that tension between opposites without falling apart. And I'm going to draw from, psychology, philosophy, and also Sufi teachings as well, because these are the things that I've kind of studied and reflected on for years now. And I want to explore this, explore how this might work altogether. And at the end, I'm also going to give you some practices, hopefully that you can actually use, things that you can do this week to start building on this capacity to hold different paradoxes, different viewpoints. And I've put them into a worksheet that you can also take with you, that you can download. So stay with me until the end. So let's start with why this is so hard. The Western philosophical tradition, the one that most of us are swimming in, whether we know it or not, it is built on something called the law of non-contradiction. Aristotle said it first, right? Something cannot be both A and not A at the same time and in the same respect. And look, that is useful. It helps us build bridges that don't collapse, and we can write code that actually runs. But we've taken this logical principle and just applied it to everything, to our identities, to emotions, to values, to ways of being in the world. And I think we've all seen this, right? You can't be both ambitious and content. You're either rational or you're emotional. You're spiritual or scientific, Eastern or Western. We've turned life itself into just, a series of binary choices. Now, psychologically, this is really important as well, because human beings are not just logical systems. We are complex, we are contradictory, we are constantly changing organisms. Carl Jung, he knew this. He talked about the psyche as containing opposites that need to be integrated. He called it holding the tension of opposites. And he said it was essential for psychological growth. And in Sufism as well, we also find a line from Rumi that went, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. And that is paradox right there. The breaking is the opening. The wound is the medicine. There's a concept also called fana and baka in Sufi thought. And these may seem like two opposite concepts, but they're actually really one. You have to lose yourself to find yourself, right? Die before you die, as they say. And, this isn't just poetry, right? Modern psychology also backs this up. in dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, it is literally built on that idea that you can accept yourself exactly as you are and work to change. So both at the same time. Marsha Linehan, who developed DBT, she says that holding these dialectical tensions is what makes transformation possible. But we are not taught this. We are taught to, pick a side or resolve the tension, or make everything coherent. And when we encounter contradictions in ourselves, when we want, solitude and connection at the same time, when we are both grieving and feeling grateful, when we are confident and also uncertain, we think that, there must be something wrong with us. Well, nothing's wrong with you. You're just human. And being human means being paradoxical. So let me get personal for a minute, because I think the best way to talk about this is through the lived experience of it. So you know that I exist in, between East and West. I've studied Western philosophy. I've immersed myself in the frameworks of it, and I've also learned to think in its terms. But I'm also deeply drawn to what we might still call the Eastern wisdom traditions. So these are, traditions like Sufism or Buddhism or Taoism. It's all because I was raised being surrounded by them, right? And for a long time, I tried to reconcile these. I thought that I had to choose or to synthesize between them into some coherent whole in some way, but that's not really what happened. What happened is that I learned to hold both, to let the analytical rigor of Western thought coexist with the intuitive wisdom of Eastern practice, to use both logic and poetry, and to be both skeptical and open at the same time. The philosopher Niels Bohr, who gave us quantum mechanics, he said that the opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. There you go, right? That's it. That's the whole thing right there. Or you can take also the spiritual scientific divide. I'm very fascinated by consciousness studies, by neuroscience, and by what we can measure and verify. And I also have a contemplative practice. I sit in silence, I pray, I meditate, I experience things that can't be quantified as well. And sometimes I get people asking me, so which is it, right? Are you spiritual or are you scientific? The question itself reveals the problem. Why can't I be both, right? Why can't I hold reverence for mystery and respect for evidence? Here's another one: ambition and contentment. We're told to be grateful for what we have, to practice contentment, to be present, but we're also told to strive, to grow, to become. And these can feel mutually exclusive, right? But they're not. You can be deeply content with who you are right now and actively working to develop new capacities. You can love your life exactly as it is and have a vision for how it could evolve. And the tension between this actually creates a kind of creative energy that you need to move forward. And in Zen traditions, they talk about goalless seeking, where you practice intensely with full effort while simultaneously letting go of attachment to the outcomes. And that, I think, is the art of paradox. Or we can also find professional examples. I've worked in corporate environments, I've been a graphic designer, and now I'm a counselor and an educator. And people want to know, which one are you really? But what if the authentic self isn't singular? What if it's multiple and contextual and fluid? What if I can show up differently in different domains and still be wholly myself? The poet Walt Whitman wrote, "I contain multitudes." And he wasn't being poetic for poetry's sake. He was describing, psychological reality. The psychologist William James also explored this idea deeply, talking about the divided self, not as a pathology, but as the natural human condition. The goal isn't to collapse into one coherent identity. The goal is to develop the capacity to move between these different modes without losing your center. And then there are also emotional paradoxes, grief and gratitude existing simultaneously, loving someone and setting boundaries with them, feeling connected to others while also being fundamentally alone. In Islamic thought, there's this concept called the barzakh. It is an intermediary realm, the space between death and resurrection. But Sufis take this understanding further, using it as a metaphor for the space between spaces. They say that this is where the mystical experience happens, not in choosing one side or the other, but in dwelling in the between. That's where we live most of the time, actually, in the barzakh, between certainty and doubt, between control and surrender, between self and other. Okay, so if this is the reality, if we are inevitably paradoxical beings in a paradoxical world, how then do we get better at holding these tensions? I want to offer you a few practices, a few ways of thinking about this that have helped me. The first is to expand your tolerance for ambiguity. There's research in psychology about something called the need for cognitive closure. Some people have a high need for it. They want clear answers, definite positions, black and white, while others have a lower need for it. They are more comfortable with uncertainty and with shades of gray. Now here's the thing. This isn't fixed. You can develop your tolerance for ambiguity by deliberately sitting with uncertainty instead of rushing to resolve it. When you encounter a contradiction in yourself or in the world, just sit down and take a pause. Don't immediately try to figure out which side is right. Just notice, there are two things that seem opposed. Both seem true. That's interesting. In Islamic theology, there's this central concept called Tawheed, the absolute oneness and unity of God. But here's where it gets interesting. Islam also speaks of the 99 names of God. For example, Al-Rahman, the merciful, or Al-Latif, the subtle, multiplicity and oneness existing together. To experience unity, you first have to sit with multiplicity. You have to let things be distinct before you can sense their underlying wholeness. And as a side note here, I have actually written a poem about this, which I will show you in a minute. So feel free to pause the video to read it. Second is to practice both and thinking, instead of either or. This is simple, but it's not easy. When you catch yourself thinking, I'm either X or Y, stop and rephrase. I'm both X and Y. Or even better, I'm X in this context and Y in this context. I'm an introvert and I love deep conversation. I value solitude and I need community. I'm disciplined and I'm spontaneous. Both and. Third, develop what the poet John Keats called negative capability. Keats described this as the ability to be in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. This is huge. Most of us, when we encounter something that we don't understand, we immediately try to explain it. We try to categorize it. We try to make sense of it. But what if we could just let it be mysterious? The Sufis say, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. There's wisdom in not knowing. There's growth in confusion. And the paradox is that Certainty often closes us off from the truth, while uncertainty opens us to it. Fourth, find your anchor point. Here's the tricky part about holding paradoxes. You need a stable center to do it from. If you're completely unmoored, if there's no ground beneath you, then contradictions just feel like chaos. So you need some kind of anchor. For some people, it is a spiritual practice, meditation or prayer or contemplation. For others, it's a set of core values. And for others still, it's a practice of self-inquiry, regularly checking in with yourself about what feels true. The philosopher Simone Weil, she wrote about rootedness, the need to have some ground even as you are open to transformation. You're not rooted to fixed beliefs, but to a practice of inquiry, to a commitment to truth, and to a sense of your own being. And for me, it's a combination of things. It's my practice of sitting in silence. It's my commitment to integrity, to not lying, not to others, and also not to myself. It's my relationship with a few people who deeply know me. And from that anchor point, I can hold paradoxes without feeling like I'm falling apart. Fifth is to recognize that integration isn't the same as resolution. Jung talked about individuation as a process of integrating opposites, but he didn't mean making them go away. He meant bringing them into conscious relationship with each other. You don't resolve the tension between discipline and spontaneity, you integrate them. You become someone who can access both as needed, who can feel the creative friction between them. In Sufism, they talk about functionalist, which is the extinction in God. It's this idea that the ego, the constructed sense of separate self, dissolves in the presence of divine reality. The boundaries you thought defined you will fall away, and the false self dissolves so that the true self can emerge. And the true self is paradoxical. It's nothing and everything, empty and full, annihilated and eternal. Number 6 is to use language carefully. Words can trap us in either or thinking. So be precise. Don't say, I'm a pessimist, when you mean, I'm feeling pessimistic about this particular situation right now. And don't say, I'm bad at relationships, when you actually mean, this relationship ended and I'm still figuring out what happened. The more precise your language is, the more space you can create for paradox. You can be many things across time, across context, across different dimensions of your being. 7th is practice presence with discomfort. When you're holding paradox, there's often a physical sensation that comes with it, this tension in your chest, a kind of buzzing uncertainty, maybe even nausea. Most of us react by trying to resolve the feeling. We reach for our phones. We make a decision just to end the discomfort. We collapse one side of the paradox to feel stable again. What if you could just be with that sensation? Not forever, but just for a few breaths. Feel the discomfort of not knowing, of both things being true, and of the tension having nowhere to go. The body learns from this, and it learns that uncertainty won't kill you. And finally, number 8 is to seek out paradoxical wisdom. Read poetry, study koans, engage with traditions that embrace paradox. The more you expose yourself to minds that think paradoxically, the more your own thinking expands. Study quantum mechanics, look at Escher paintings, watch how jazz musicians hold multiple rhythms at once. Find the places where culture has encoded paradox and let it reshape our mental habits. So why does all this matter? Why develop this capacity? Because the world is complex. Because reality resists our categories. Because the biggest challenges we face, like environmental issues and political polarization and technological disruption and, even questions of meaning in this day and age. These are all inherently paradoxical. We need both individual action and collective transformation. We need both technological innovation and ecological constraint. We need both tradition and progress, both certainty in our values and openness to revision. If you can't hold paradox, if you can't navigate complexity, you'll keep looking for simple answers that don't exist. You'll keep forcing reality into boxes that doesn't fit. But more than that, I think, and this is where it gets really interesting, the ability to hold paradox is actually a form of spiritual maturity. In most wisdom traditions, the beginning stages are about learning the rules and accepting the dogma and following the path, right? But the advanced stages, they are about transcending duality, seeing through the false oppositions, and resting in the tension. Look at the Taoist symbol of yin and yang, right? Which I'm sure most, if not all of us, have seen. It's a symbol of the way opposites contain each other within a greater hold. There's a seed of dark in the light and a seed of light in the dark. The circle holds them both. That's the whole teaching right there, encoded in an image. And personally, I think learning to hold paradox makes you more compassionate. Because when you can hold contradictions in yourself, you can hold them in others too. You stop needing people to be consistent. You stop demanding that they be one thing and one thing alone. You can see someone as both wounded and wise, as both selfish and generous, and as both lost and finding their way, just like you are and just like we all are. So here's what I want to leave you with. You're not broken because you contain contradictions. You're not confused because things don't all line up neatly. You're human, and being human means being paradoxical. The art isn't in eliminating paradoxes. It's in learning to hold them with grace, with curiosity, with a kind of spaciousness that lets everything be true at once. Now, I promised you some practical exercises, some things that you can actually do with this. So here are 3 practices to explore this week, okay? Exercise 1, the paradox journal. Every day for the next week, write down one paradox you notice in yourself. Not to resolve it, but just to name it. Today I felt both energized and exhausted. Today I want to be alone and I'm feeling lonely. I'm uncertain about my values and questioning everything. So just notice, just name, and let the paradoxes exist on the page without commentary. At the end of the week, read through them, see if any patterns emerge, see if holding them in language makes them feel less threatening. Now, I've put printable pages of this journal into a worksheet that you can download. So there's a link down below, right below this video. It'll give you prompts, space to write, and some additional guidance for each practice. Exercise 2 is the both and conversation. So pick one relationship in your life. It can be with a friend or a partner or a colleague. And for one conversation, practice saying yes and instead of yes but. When they express something that you agree with, affirm it and add to it. And when they express something you disagree with, find the kernel of truth in it and hold it alongside your own truth. You can say, yes, I see how you experience that, and here's how I experience it. Both perspectives get to exist. Watch what happens to the quality of connection when you're not trying to win or convince. You actually get to have a real dialogue, not a debate, but an exchange where both people come away from the conversation feeling expanded. Exercise 3 is the paradox meditation. Sit quietly for 10 minutes and bring to mind a paradox you're living with right now. Maybe it's, I need to plan for the future and I need to be present now. Maybe it's, I want stability and I want adventure. Hold both sides in your awareness and don't try to reconcile them yet. Just breathe and let them both be there. Notice what happens in your body. Notice if there's a shift in how it feels to hold these opposites without choosing. The Sufis say that the heart is the organ of paradox, not the mind. The mind wants resolution. The heart can hold everything at once. This is the work. Not to become coherent, but to become spacious. Not to resolve every contradiction, but to develop the capacity to hold them. And here's what I've come to understand. The tensions don't go away. You just get bigger. You expand. You develop more room inside yourself for all of it, for the light and the dark, the knowing and the unknowing, the question and the answer that contains new questions. That is the art of holding paradoxes without falling apart. So thanks for being here. Thanks for sitting with these ideas with me. And if this resonated with you, I'd love to hear what paradoxes you're holding right now. Leave a comment and share your reflections. And until next time, stay curious, stay open, and remember, you are allowed to be everything you are all at once.